Hello everyone, how's it going and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going through the Rhodia Side-Stapled A5 notebook that's in the dot page configuration. Rhodia doesn't actually call this notebook the dotBook, it's just that I'm not sure what, this could be the older version of the book. The newer ones don't actually have the label called dotBook. I've been using this notebook not as a journal, but primarily, I don't really do much journaling to be honest, but I've been using this notebook primarily for taking meeting notes, practicing my cursive writing as well as general note taking and doodling. And for most of these use cases, this notebook has served me well. I've bought a couple of these in not just the dotBook configuration, but also in lines and plain, which we'll go through later on in future videos. But since I'm running out of pages, I just have a few pages left. I thought I'll just do a review of this notebook before I kind of run out of pages and I'll throw it away. I don't really keep my notebooks, like I mentioned, because of, there's nothing really valuable in my notes. And if it's really valuable, I would have just transferred it to electronic form and something like that. So to start things off, dimension wise, I've been wondering for a long time whether or not to deviate from A5. So this is an A5 notebook. For those of you who don't know, A5 is like roughly half of letter size or half of an A4 sheet. Dimension wise, the metric dimension is shown here. It's 14.8 by 21 centimeters. It has 48 sheets, 98 pages, and it's using Rhodia paper 80 grams or 80 GSM. As noted down here, this notebook is PEFC certified, as nearly all of the Rhodia the notebooks that I've had. Basically what PEFC means is that the paper that's being used is sustainably sourced, which is always a valuable thing I feel when getting paper. The notebook is made in France, and it has a fairly thin cover like this, which it's coated, or it's kind of semi-coated in a way, so it's fairly durable cover, but it's not something that you would probably want to keep, and kind of, it doesn't look, expensive or something that's journal worthy in my opinion. It's just a typical notebook with fairly thin covers. So for the most parts of what I'm using, I think 48 sheets is pretty sufficient. I've been using this notebook for roughly 2 to 3 months, and I think it's fair enough. I do use other notepads and other form of paper together with this notebook, so I think it's quite a decent size. It's not so thick as to be very irritating when you try to open the pages. I think 48 sheets is kind of the sweet spot for me in terms of notebooks. In terms of the binding, I've done previous video where I reviewed the Clairefontaine notebook that had way more pages than this particular notebook, and that one actually had a cloth binding. I think it was the Back to Basics A5 notebook that had the 90 GSM paper. And back then I kind of did a little bit of whinging that, that notebook had too many pages. And I was exploring other forms of binding. That's why I kind of went to staple bound. And for the most part, staple bound notebooks have a couple of advantages in that you can really force the pages to lie flat. Still a little bit bouncy on the left hand side, but for most cases you can force the notebook a little bit better. The downside to staple bound is basically the fact that it uses staples. And I'm in Singapore, as most of you know, and it's fairly humid country, and staples have actually started to rust, which is kind of surprising to me that it would do that, especially since this notebook is not that old, right? I don't bring it out to the rain or anything like that. But generally, we are here to talk about the paper as well as the notebook binding format. So let's take a look at how this notebook performs with a fountain pen, which is the primary writing instrument I use with all my paper. As you can see, I was kind of fiddling around with some inks, and it tends to have a little bit of show through for some of the inks. I'm just going to write out these some lines that I've already written up on like a plain copy paper, and we'll kind of compare how much bleed through and feathering this paper has, this 80 GSM Rhodia paper has, compared to standard copy paper. So I'm going to write a little bit on this empty sheet, and we'll kind of do that comparison. While we are here, and before I do the writing, I just wanted to speak a little bit about dots. My impression of dots is it was designed, or it was invented to have a type of paper form that was an alternative to standard lined paper, and it was meant to be inobtrusive when writing. So some people don't like to see lines on the paper once they finish writing a letter, for example. So for the most parts, I think dot paper, it works. It's just that for me, I'll just show you something very quickly, that if I write within the boundaries of I hope this comes out of those lines. I haven't really measured. I think it's about 5 millimeters or something like that. It doesn't really work, right? So if I write like this, you'll notice that there's a little bit of overlap between the two lines, so to say, if I were to treat these dots as lines. So even though it has roughly 40 rows of dots down the page, I tend to use the dots on this notebook this way, by leaving a line, right? So basically I would actually kind of write my usual notes. I don't write quick brown fox every day, guys. But basically I would write like this, and this way, there will not be that clash of, the downstrokes of, maybe some letters into the upstrokes of others. So just bear this in mind. That's what, at least my size handwriting, that I've actually realized that you have to kind of leave a space this way. And of course, the advantage of dots is also, if you are kind of a bullet, using this book for a bullet journal, you can actually utilize the dots to kind of use it like this way. Right, so I mean, I don't really do bullet journaling, and I don't really take notes this way, but I think that's also one of the ways you can actually use bullets, that you can actually use these as literally bullet points when writing notes, right? So as promised, I'm going to start off with the Pilot Falcon, and I'm going to write with a fairly light hand, which I always do, right? So this is the Pilot Falcon, and this is the soft fine nib. I believe it's Waterman Serenity Blue. Which is a lovely bright blue. I'm going to switch to the Preppy. So there's a little bit of bounce to the paper, just not that irritating, right? But just bear in mind there is a little bit of bounce. And the Preppy is actually in 02 or extra fine. And I think this is in Sailor Black. I'm going to switch to the much thicker, slightly thicker Custom Heritage. '92, and that's in the FM, and I believe this is in Pilot Roshi. Sorry, Suku, and I believe it's using Suigyoku. So I'm going to switch to the Pilot Custom, and I've noticed this is soft fine, extra fine, this is fine medium, so this is now the Pilot Custom 74, and this is in fine, and this is just standard Pilot Blue Black. Then I'll move to some of the probably the wetter pens that I have, starting with the Scribble Feel. And this is in the Flex Nib. And this is in a lovely shade of pink, which is the Pilot Suit. Tsutsuji. Not sure whether I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I find that typically red inks or inks that have a little reddish tinge to it tend to go through paper a lot more than other colors. Maybe that's just me. And the last pad, which is my super wet Mont Blanc, should be together 149, and this is in the broad. And this is also using ink by Pilot. So it's Murasaki Shikibu. So now the moment of truth, I mean, comparing with, and I was using kind of the same writing pressure with these two, with all the pens. So this is what the bleed through was for typical plain A4 copy paper. Not too bad. I think the major bleed through that showed was probably a little bit of the Sukchi, right, the pink color, and obviously the very wet Mont Blanc showed through. A bit of the Serenity Blue showed up as well. And we'll kind of compare that with, and if you can see closely, you can see tiny bit of feathering for the Mont Blanc, even for the Scribble Feels ink. Tiny bit for the Pilot, not so much for these, maybe a little bit for the Custom 92 with the FM as well. But the feathering isn't too bad actually on plain copy paper. So I just compare this with Rhodia 80 gram 80 GSM, it doesn't do that well as well for certain types of very wet inks. Like for example, this broad Mont Blanc, you can see a tiny bit of feathering. It's just a tiny bit. As for the others, there wasn't that much of a feathering, at least I can't really see it. It's pretty well behaved. So on the other side, in terms of the ink bleeding through, not too much, but if you have a very wet pen, I think it's not so much the broadness of the nib, but the wetness of the nib. Some of the inks might actually bleed through, right, for this 80 GSM. Thing about it is, I didn't notice that type of bleed through for the 90 GSM paper by Clairefontaine. Kind of gives me that, I didn't mention the smoothness of this particular 80 GSM paper. So it's moderately smooth. It's not super smooth like that Clairefontaine, which is why it works well with pens which might give a little bit of problem, like very, very smooth nib pens like this 149. It doesn't skip at all. So advantages of having like a slightly more texturized paper like this, very, very slightly compared to the Clairefontaine, which was, I think some people commented that that one was like coated paper and it was very, very smooth. That type of paper might have a little bit less bleed through. However, it might give you problems with pens with very, very smooth nibs like these ones down here. So in conclusion, I didn't mention the price of this notebook. I bought it for roughly, if I'm not wrong, about 4 Singapore dollars. Kind of like in the $3 plus range for the US dollars. And I feel that for the price that I paid, I think it's a fair price. Would I buy this notebook again? I already have a couple in my drawer. I'm going to use them up. However, my feeling is, you could do better with slightly cheaper options out there. For example, my trusty Hurlitz notebook, which I've been using kind of in parallel with this notebook. I'm going to review this notepad in a future video. This particular one is 70 GSM. However, I think it works a lot better for bleed through as well as feathering compared to the 80 GSM by Rhodia, right? So you'll see that you'll see this notepad's performance, or this writing pad's performance compared to this notebook in a future video. Yeah, so I mean, in terms of would I buy this again, I think there will be a lot of other options out there in the market for you to kind of explore. If you only have Rhodia in your market, please give it a shot and try it out. I don't think it's a bad notebook at all. But in general, there are other options out there for you to try. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Let me know what you think about this notebook. Would you buy this notebook, or is this commonly available where you live? I would love to know your thoughts and impressions, and looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.